Okay. Don't know. Somebody's on top of things. So let us get down to the task at hand. You all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I had my speaker off. Good. Fix that now.
Yes, we hear you.
Good. Okay, I'm just trying to get that full screen. Okay, we're in business. So, welcome to Shiur number 6 of Hilchas Taruvos. So today we are learning Siman Kuf Aleph, and if we get to it, there's a related sif from Kuf Yud. That's sort of a continuation of the din over here, or related to the din over here, closely related. So hopefully we'll get to that too if we can. And we are in the middle of things which are not batel. In Siman Tzadik Ches and Tzadik Tes, we spoke about regular cases of bittul and the general principles of bittul and the prohibition of batel islo chatchila. And then Kuf, Kuf Aleph, Kuf Beis are all different cases, categories that are fila belef le batel, that there's no bittul b'shishim on. And last week we learned the law of a beria, of a complete creation, creature of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That was Siman Kuf. And today's subject, Kuf Aleph, is Chatich Haroy Liskabit. And part of that, Liskabit Lifnei Ha'orchim, that it's a piece which is befitting, honorable enough to feed your guests. It's a good way to remember the Siman. Aleph is for Orchim. And then next week, Kuf Beis is about the din of Dover Sheyesh Lo Matirin. So these are the general categories. Bari was Siman Kuf. Chatich Haroy Liskabit Lifnei Orchim, Siman Kuf Aleph. It's very interesting. They picked the picture of a pulk over here. They tell a story that in Eretz Yisrael, in Bnei Brak, and Nissen Karelitz, and the Rav Vosner, Shalom, from the Gedela Poskim there. So they asked whether is a pulk is a Chatich Haroy Liskabit. So it seemed that Nissen Karelitz's kila was a more poor kihila, and Rabbi Vosner's kila was more wealthy. So they asked the Rav Karelitz, and he said, no, they said, yeah, it's a Chatich Haroy Liskabit, a pulka. And they asked Rav Vosner, he said, not just a pulka by itself. No, that's not a Chatich Haroy Liskabit. So they say, we'll see later on. The Shach says, the Bechal, what's considered Chatich Haroy Liskabit. If you want to get down, we're going to be learning the general principles. But if you want to get down to particular pieces of things, it's going to depend on the time and the place. And the next subject, which is for the next year, is Dover Sheyesh Lo Matirin. It's a picture of an egg. It's the classic case, Be'esh Nolda B'Yom Tov, which is Muktzah on Yom Tov, and after Neilad Muktzah, whatever the case is, and that will become permitted after Yom Tov. So Dover Sheyesh Lo Matirin, El Fila Belef Le Bottle. Then a Kuf Yud, we have a couple of related in Yonim. You have a Dover Chashuv / Dover Shabaminyan. Why you have the slash and what's the definition of Dover Shabaminyan? We might talk about it a bit today, but mainly that's for Siman Kuf Yud. That's Sif Aleph, and then Sif Beis is the law of Balachayim. That's related to a din we have at the end of today's Siman. So if we can, we'll talk about that also at the end of today's Shiur. But that's the overview of Dvarim She'enim B'Teilim, as it says on the top. And as we had by the din of Beria, this chumrah that Afila Belef Le Batel is a din midraban, because minateira is b'teilim bereva b'shishim, depending on what the case is. I mean, b'minei is minateira batel berev, min b'she'enim minei batel b'shishim. Midiraisa, but the chachamim go through in general cases the yinit shishim, even if it's min b'she'enim minei. The Chazara from previously, if it's mean b'she'enim minei, you need shishim midiraisa, because nason tam otherwise. The whole discussion there is really the gather mamash shishim. We'll learn from El Nazir, or is it tam? And since we don't rely on a kfela arma, on a nachri to taste it, so therefore we use shishim instead. Is that the case, or is it batsam shishim? Spoke about that before. Any case, that's min b'she'enim minei. Min b'minei is batel berev midiraisa, midirabanan, required shishim. Okay, but Chachamim Gazru Shein Betel Mafila Be'elef. All of the different categories that we have here on the screen are all cases that we have a Issa Derabban that the Chachamim were gazer that these things, even if you have Rave and even if you have Shishim, nevertheless, they are not booked. Okay, we spoke last week a bit about what if you have Elef, it says a fil Elef le bottle, and if you have 1,001, okay, the day is to say 960. But Pikir didn't we hold fil Elef le bottle means it's a mashahu, but even if it's 1,000, 10,000, no matter how big it is, the akuda is that it's not bottle. Okay, so that's a general overview. And today we have Chatich Roy Skabit. So you have a bunch of steaks over here. Nobody's going to argue that it's a piece of meat. It's a davar choshuv. You would give this steak to a person, to a choshuv, a guest, a beheller. So saying gesund, saying kegel that in America was the hidder that the steak had to be so big it was hanging off both sides of the plates. As Masmid came to America, he wrote back and he says, "Eichlim chaticha shel basar b'chol yem, chatichas gedeles shel basar b'chol yem, Rahman al-Atzlan." That the Rahman al-Atzlan, the people are eating big pieces of meat every day, different asagas. Anyway, certainly this is an example of chaticha or skabit. We'll see many examples of things which are on the borderline, whether they're chaticha or skabit, or for sure not chaticha or skabit. We'll get to that soon. But the first thing we need to establish is the general category. So here we have a piece of nevela. Okay, it's the same cut of meat, but its gray appearance is to indicate that not that it got overcooked, but that it's a piece of nevela. So the other ones on this serving utensil are kosher, and this one is an nevela. Now we have our special coloring to indicate that it's an nevela, but when you look at it, it just looks the same. Just a piece of meat got mixed up and they cooked it together with everything else, so we can't tell the difference. Later on, somebody says, "Hey, hang on a second, why there are 5 pieces of meat here, not 4? There were only 4 kosher ones, and there was 1 nevela." So now we got a nevela mixed in. So what do we do? So even if you have more, if I said it's called Taruvos, you can't eat any of these pieces of meat because they're all mixed together. We can't tell what's what. And even though large pieces of things, as we mentioned before, and we'll learn later on, in many cases we have that it's bottle v'reiv, with not nice and tam and so on. But over here, since it's a chaticha roy l'skabed, it's a piece which has a special chashivas to it. So then I feel about a flay bottle, and the whole thing's going to become aser. Furthermore, if the chaticha is aser ba'ana, everything becomes aser ba'ana. Let's say it was basar b'chalev, which is aser ba'ana, and now that it's mixed in, it's not just that it's aser b'chila. It takes on the entire taruvos. Since it's not bottle, the entire mixture, everything together, has the din of the worst piece, of the worst chaticha roy l'skabed. So since we have one piece mixed in that's also ba'ana, everything that mixed in also becomes aser ba'ana. Shame. The Shach brings down over here a little bit of kula regarding this, and the whole thing is also ba'ana. It says, what does it mean you're not allowed to have hana? So the Taruvos is also from the Yid is going to have hana from the nevela, okay? But excuse me, from the if it's also ba'ana from the basar b'chalev. So if a person and that iser ba'ana is also b'mashu, that it's all mixed together. But there's not more than a slight amount of mashu basar b'chalev, so it's not tefes the domim. So the Shach holds that you're allowed to sell this entire taruvos to a guy. Okay, the amount of basar b'chalev, that steak, you can't collect money for because it's also ba'ana. But although you cannot get hana by eating the entire thing, so the Shach holds that you're allowed to sell it as long as you don't get hana from that small amount over here. So he brings down that this is the Isra Hana. He brings down it's like the Ferish Gemara Naveda Zora Dafayin Dalit. Yeah. So he's going to have this later on, Simikuf Yud, so we'll revisit this later on, but that's the mention it over here, because it is mentioned over here in the Rama. Okay, and as we said before, we had I mean in today's Shiur and also in last week's Shiur, in the Din of Beria, that since it's only a Chumra D'Rabbanan, so therefore Makom Safik, it's a Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So if we're not sure whether something's a Beria or not, or we're not sure whether something is a Chticha Royal Eskabit or not, then it's going to be a Safik D'Rabbanan L'Kula. And this is going to be very, very relevant. The Beria is more concrete to define than it is a Chaticha Royal Eskabit. Because as you said before, and we'll see later on, that this depends largely on the time and the place. So what kind of suffix counts and what kind of suffix doesn't count, we'll also talk about later on. But nevertheless, the klal you have to know that if it's a suffix, whether it's royal eskabed or not, then it says Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. And that's the same like we had last week by Beria. Now, if it's a suffix, we'll just go back a second. Simikov base, which is Dover Sheyesh Matirin, we mentioned in the introduction last week's Shiur that Dover Sheyesh Matirin is different from all the other categories of things that are not batel. And we mentioned a few ways in which they're different. This is one of the ways in which they're different. That a Dover Sheyesh Matirin, like an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. So then, if you have a suffix, it's also asur. Why? Because you can always eat a beheter. So you're not going to be mekel to let him eat it on Yom Tov. If he could eat it after Yom Tov, the whole Inyan of Dover Sheyesh Matirim, you can wait anyway. So this all for this, it's a suffix you can also wait. So you're not going to lose out in such a case. So just mentioning it over here, it's not going to apply in all situations. The same klal applies to a beria and a Dover Sheyesh Matirim, Simukuf and Simukuf Aleph. It does not apply in Simukuf base, as Mirza Shem will learn the next year. Okay, so that's only if the suffix is in the Inyan which is midrabanan. But sometimes you have a suffix, you say, okay, it's suffix chticha eskabed. Okay, it's midrabanan, Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. Cha, weiter gefahren. Baruch Hashem, I learned smicha. Okay, but the problem is that you have to make sure that your suffix is a Sveika D'Rabbanan. If you have a suffix, but it's not in the chticha eskabed part, it's in the D'Araisa part, then you have a problem. So if a suffix in the chticha is also or not, then it's a Sveika D'Araisa L'Chumra. So let's say you have that brown gray piece of meat we had before. So we said it's a nevela. Okay, that's how it's a vade nevela. Let's say it's a suffix nevela. So you have a suffix nevela. You're not sure. Suffix nevela, 2 pieces of meat. You took one of them. You're not sure. It's a suffix shakel, 50-50 chance. So we say, do you have to aser? Let's say there's 1,000 pieces of meat over here. There's 1,000 pieces of meat over here. 1,000 pieces. You have to throw all 1,000 pieces of meat. You have to aser. It's suffix in the din of chticha royal eskabed, and the din of the suffix of chticha royal eskabed is midrabanan, Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So we could be matter 1,000 pieces. It's only a suffix yeser. No, it's a mistake. It's only midrabanan, but it's a suffix whether it's royal eskabed or not. If it's for sure royal eskabed, but it's a suffix whether it's asur or not, that's a Sveika D'Araisa. That one piece is a Sveika D'Araisa. Okay, therefore you're not allowed to eat it. Now it's for sure royal eskabed. Okay, so we don't have a suffix in the din midrabanan, we have a suffix in the din D'Araisa. So since that one piece is asur, and now we have a vadai, since you're not allowed to eat it because Sveika D'Araisa L'Chumra, and now that's mixed up with a bunch of other pieces and it's royal eskabed, so then we don't have a Sveika D'Rabbanan L'Hakil. There's no, it's a vade D'Rabbanan, it's a vade Yisa D'Rabbanan. Because the piece for sure you're not allowed to eat because it's Sveika D'Araisa. That's the suffix. But we have a vada deraisa. It's a vada that's chaticha roya l'skabed. I'll just mention, we'll have some cases later on, but you have these cases happening not every day, but you have them happening today, and that's what we'll see later on. But Balachayim, you have today in a shlachtos, in a slaughterhouse, this happens, you'll end up, because you have animals being slaughtered, there's nevelas, there's treifas. Today, in general, when you have behemoths, the majority of them are not kosher. I mean, they're cows, but it's a nevela treifa. More than 50% today, and you don't have too many nevelas if there's proper conditions for a sheichet. But treifas, you can't protect it against treifas. And then you have in the chickens, the things happen and then they get mixed up. At least by the behemoths, you're checking every single one for the nevelas. But by the chickens, the way they're doing it today is you're doing many at a time, and you can end up having one mixed in. So what happens if is this a suffix? You have one chicken mixed in with a bunch of other chickens. We say it's a chaticha roya l'skabed or not. Okay, we're going to get it. Has feathers, not feathers. We'll see in Sif Gimel. But as far as the thing itself, why is it aser? It's offer. We're not sure it's roya l'skabed or not. If it's for sure roya l'skabed, you're just not sure. There was a problem with the knife. There was a suffix pegim in the chalif, and you're not sure whether it's aser or not. So then it's a sveka deraisa. So as is everything. We don't have this heter of chaticha roya l'skabed, of sveka derabban. Clear? Yeah. Fine. We learned earlier about the idea of what constitutes a suffix or not. I think I'll save it for a little bit later. Talk to it later on. Okay, so we have three conditions. If you remember Beria, we had four conditions that we needed in order for it to be considered a Beria. And over here, to be considered chaticha roya l'skabed, see, things get easier now. Now there's only three conditions. What are the three conditions? So the first condition has to be iser machmas atzmi, or matzad atzmi, that it itself is aser. That comes to exclude an iser balua, that it absorbed an iser. So it's not exactly the same that we had by Beria. We had the aser mitchilas briyase, that it was aser from the time it came into existence. This is that iser machmas atzmi, matzad atzmi, that it itself is aser. It's not just aser because it absorbed an iser. We'll speak about these conditions individually, each one on its own merits its own discussion. Just to have a question over here, what if it's both a suffix, if it's roy, and a suffix, if it's treif? If it's a suffix, it's roya l'skabed, even if it's a vade treif, it's mutter. The case that we said, sveka derabban l'kula, is we're talking about a vade deraisa got mixed in. It's just we're not sure whether it's roya l'skabed or not. So if it's a suffix, whether it's a chaticha roya l'skabed, this is sveka derabban l'kula, even if it's for sure treif. If it's a suffix, it's treif, then it's even more so. Okay, so the first condition is the iser machmas atzmi. Okay, another question over here. Somebody asked me quietly. Where did we learn the din of a small piece of treif that falls into heter that's mutter if they're shishim? Remember somehow that the pieces are aser if you can't identify the iser, but the reitav is mutter if shishim. Now we're talking last week about a beria. Talking about that a beria that we're aser the chatichas and we're matter the reitav. Okay, really, to get a full picture of this, we really need to make it to Siman Kuftes. So Bezos Hashem Yisvarach will make it there. We didn't get there then, but to have the whole picture of what to do in all of these different chatichas being mixed in. Fine. You say in Basa B'chalav, we had the din, if you have a a mixture, but the min b'mina, min b'sha'ina mina, masalik, as aina mine, in the case with the Rashba over here, you masalik the mina, masalik the aina mine. Maybe that's you're referring to. Okay, so the first condition we need for Ch'tich Haroy L'Skabed, Nachdul Nyanenu, it has to be Isser Mitzad Atzmi. We're going to speak about some protim of that soon. Second condition, you have a picture of a crab over there. Crabs are Isser Machmas Atzmi. Fine. Tanai Sheni, the Isser Yeh Muchen La'Gosha, that it has to be ready to serve. Ch'tich Haroy L'Skabed Lifnei Orchem, to serve in front of Orchem. Now, the pieces that we had over there were completely ready to serve. They were already cooked and ready to eat. Mamish Lifnei Orchem. Everybody agrees that that would be Ch'tich Haroy L'Skabed. Okay, what if it's still raw? You didn't cook it yet. What if it's in a previous state? We talked about right after the Shechita. So that we're going to have a Machlekes Machaber Ramah. We're going to get there. Tonight, Shlishi, the third condition to become a Ch'tich Haroy L'Skabed. Ma'achal Haroy L'Skabed Lifnei Orchem Chashuvim. This is a marshal. It said Lifnei Orchem. Orchem means like a chashuv orchem. You have some sort of food that you might eat it for lunch. If there's mamish nothing to eat and you're starving, then you'll eat it. The food's a chayes. It's not rotten. You're not allowed to eat food that starts shinui. It's also didn't shulchan aruch. You're not allowed to eat dvarim meusim, the things that started to smell, things that started to spoil. You're not allowed to eat. But here it's not spoiled. Everything's fine. It's 100% good. But it's nishtazei to give to a guest. Okay, so the Mashal says that to be lifnei orchem chshuvim. Give us a little more of a tzura about what it is that we are talking about. Okay. So, condition number 1, and I won. Chaticha asura mitzad atzmi. What does it mean, the isur mitzad atzmi? So we have on the right a piece of meat that's not kosher. We have on the left a piece of meat that's not kosher. Now, why they're not kosher? On the right-hand side, a drop of blood fell inside. Dam is isur de'oraisa. You're not allowed to eat dam. Okay, and this dam, I don't know whether they used raw meat over here. Okay, for the dam, it works. For the chalav, it doesn't work so well. But in any case, you can't eat that piece of meat. If it was by itself, it's prohibited mid'oraisa, unless you have bittul b'shishim on the dam. You see it, that's a pretty big drop, or a pretty small piece. Whatever the case is, you don't have shishim, you don't have 60 times more meat than blood. So since blood fell into, we're going to talk about soon what happens if the blood was there originally. You didn't do malicha on it. You didn't salt it to get out the blood. Here we're talking about a case where blood dripped inside. So that is not isur machmas atzmi. The meat itself was a kosher piece of meat. Now you can't eat the meat because it has blood that got absorbed inside. So that's not an isur machmas atzmi. That's an isur balua. It absorbed the prohibition, and therefore you can't eat the piece of meat because it has blood going throughout the piece. On the left, however, we have milk. The basar b'chalav is called the isur machmas atzmi. So nevela, again, don't get confused between kuf aleph and sim kuf. As far as berry is concerned, a nevela, for example, this animal was kosher. You messed up the shechita or it died, and therefore it's a nevela. Okay, so that wasn't asur mitchilas priyasi. That was the definition of a berry. Over here, we're talking about ch'tich haroy l'skabed. It doesn't matter whether it was created today. What matters is isur machmas atzmi. So a nevela is isur machmas atzmi. It doesn't just absorb the isur. It itself is usur. If it just absorbed the isur, that's not enough. The shaila is over here, why can't we say the meat, just like the meat on the right-hand side, absorb blood, isur balua? So we'll say over here the meat absorb milk. So the reason we don't say that is because both of them are heter. The milk is kosher and the meat is kosher. And when they form together, when they get cooked together specifically, then become a brand new isur. And that is called the isur machmas atzmi. It became a brand new isur. It's not that you have basar and they can't eat the basar because it has tam cholav in it. If it has tam cholav in it, it becomes a new metzias, a basar b'cholav. And that, if you remember, when we learned Hilchas basar b'cholav, that was one of the major chedushim in the Alter Rebbe in Hilchas basar b'cholav. The Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchas Pesach, but he writes over there, Lagabe basar b'cholav, that Basa b'chalav is a shem chodosh. It's a brand new name, and therefore, if you have a case where it's very, very weak, the taste for whatever reason, it's not barnat or something needed libun and yakashu with hagala. That's what Alter Rebbe says in Tofnon Aleph. So in those cases, so it cannot acquire the brand new name of Basa b'chalav. It has such a shvach metzias. Anyway, that's called the Issa Machmas Atzmei. So if you recall, we did have a whole discussion about whether we should treat Basa b'chalav precisely like a nevela or not. We had it a few times in Siman Pei Zayin. We had it right at the beginning of Siman Pei Zayin. If you remember, we discussed over there was a Bach that wanted to make a whole diuk in the Tur. Both the Shach and Taz talking about it. And they want to say that lagabe chatich. You remember we first had the term chatich haroi l'skabed right over there in the first shiur, the beginning of Siman Pei Zayin in Basa b'chalav, because we wanted to say lagabe chatich haroi l'skabed Basa b'chalav is also called the Isar Machmas Atzmei. So why shouldn't we treat it like the same way in other conditions? We had the same thing at the end of Siman Pei Zayin when it talked about making cheese. Okay, so on the one hand we call it Isar Machmas Atzmei, but in some other contexts, we don't treat it identically with the idea of a nevela, but in this inyan chatich haroi l'skabed, basically, in this case, we consider it to be Isar Machmas Atzmei. So if it just absorbs something which is aser, so then there's no, then it's called Isar b'luah. So chatich is basa kasherish nivla ba'isar. You have a kosher, a piece of meat, and it absorbs something which is prohibited, b'teila b'reiv. So then you have chatichas, the batal b'reiv, v'kulam taurus. And therefore, all of them are okay. The bottle berev. So now let's say it got cooked together. So we have the din, the famous machlekes machaber Ramah we had in Siman Tzadik Beis. The machaber in Siman Tzadik Beis says that Basa b'chalav is not only Basa b'chalav is nasa nevela and not shari surim. The Ramah holds we have chatich nasa nevela even with shari surim. Okay. So therefore, if this piece was, let's say, 10 ounces, and 1 ounce of blood fell inside. So according to the Machaber, you need 60 times the blood, 60 times 1. You had 60 ounces in the pot, it would be good enough. It could even be mitzvah of the piece itself, so you only need another 59 ounces. Or you can include the 10 ounces, excuse me, you need another 50 ounces. And according to the Ramah, the whole 11 ounces, the 10 ounces of meat, and is nasa nevela together with the 1 ounce of blood, and therefore you're going to need 60 times 11, 660, whatever the case is. Okay, but that's as far as the din of chatich nasa nevela and Siman Tzadik Beis. That doesn't make it a Isar Machmas Atzmei. Chatich nasa nevela is when it comes to measuring bittul against something else, the whole thing's tereif. But that doesn't mean be'etzem the meat became tereif. The blood made the thing nasa nevela, but it's not the same thing as a nevela. It's the same thing as a nevela lagabe measurement, but it's not identical mamish to a nevela as far as the din of chatich haroi l'skabed. Machaber says this explicitly. Even the one that holds chatich nasa nevela b'shari surim does not mean the Isar b'luah is called nasa nevela. It's not nasa nevela. Okay, but Basa b'chalav is a different story. We don't have bittul berev, we don't even have bittul b'shishim. We have a filabel, a flay bottle, because of chatich haroi l'skabed. Good. Okay, next case. See, kol masuris. Fine. I guess that yellow means it's the Allah. Okay, now we're going to talk about cheese. This is a whole long taz discussing cheese, and I'll take it off here for a second, and just talk for a second, give a little bit of an introduction. What we're going to be talking about over here in this next slide is, we have Shach and Taz in the Shulchan Aruch, and there are many cases where the Shach, since he saw the Taz, even though the Taz was older, but he did see it, and the Shach saw the Taz, and sometimes when he disagrees, he does so very, very vociferously in a pirush called Nekudas HaKesef. Nekudas HaKesef is printed on the same page as the regular Shulchan Aruch. Sometimes in the Taz, you'll see a simon over there, and Nekudas HaKesef. So on this dinner, the cheese, that's exactly the Lashon. He has a very, very, Kol Masha Kosov Be'ez Zeh Lesser. Everything the Taz writes, Langa Taz, get a bishop to Shach. Everything he writes in this entire Sif Katan is wrong, says the Shach. Disagrees with it. Hakel Bakel. Anyway, what's it talking about? We're talking about whether cheese, a piece of cheese, could be considered chtichar or iskabet. That's the subject. It's interesting. The Prima Gadim, you see historically, the Prima Gadim talks about the big rounds of cheese that come from Holland. They had these frisbees, whatever, the big blocks of cheese. They were considered the davar chashuv. So is that called the chtichar or iskabet? Not called the chtichar or iskabet. Okay. So in order to understand this, what it's talking about, I can just give you one hakdama for something which I think is going to help us by the end. And it's a concept that we have certain things that we're machmer mitzad sofik. Let's say Yom Tov Sheni. Yom Tov Sheni, so at the times when they had the Kiddush HaChedesh Al Pi Ariyas, you didn't know which day the Edom saw the moon, and when the Bezdin said Mekudesh, so we don't know which day was Aleph, and it comes, we have a Sveika Dayema. If you're living outside Eretz Yisrael, you didn't get the news in time, so you don't know which day is Rosh Hashanah, it's just a Suffolk. So Mitzat Suffolk, they kept 2 days Yom Tov. Now we're not Makadesh Al Pi Ariyah anymore. Since we're not Makadesh Al Pi Ariyah anymore, but what happened to the Suffolk? Anybody has a Suffolk? It's like, we say, in order to fool the Satan. Okay, what kind of fooling the Satan are we doing over here? The Satan just takes out a calendar. The Satan can go to Chabad.org and find out what's going on. He'll know exactly which day is which, and he doesn't have any problem to figure out what's going on. But nevertheless we keep Yom Tov Sheni. What's the point? The point is that the Chamim were gezer, and therefore we see Lagabe Mene Dinim. It has the din of a Yom Tov Vadai. It has an additional strength to it because the Chachamim were gezer, and once they were gezer, it became a davar bar. It's for sure aser. It's not the reason they were masakin is because Maisi I was saying b'yadeim and so on, because then it was Sveika Diyema. We don't have any Sveika Diyema today. So how is it we're coming along and making a shachionu, making these brachas? What's going on? Because the Chachamim were masakin did this, just like you make a bracha on Chanukah, on the Menorah. The Chachamim said that you have to light a Menorah and make a bracha. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So Yom Tov Sheni today is a vada. So when it comes to this cheese that we're talking about, now we're going to get back to the cheese. We have different ways in which cheese can become asur. How many ways could a piece of cheese become asur? So actually there are many ways. We're going to discuss 3 ways that cheese could become asur. And based on those, we're going to have a discussion. Is it katol roi laskabit or not? So gavina asura roi laskabit, she decided the gavinas kasheris acheres and mispatla. So here we have a bunch of pieces of cheese over here, and one of them is asur. And if it's a chaticha roi laskabit, so then they're all going to become asur. Everything is going to become asur, everything together. Yeah. The sikha. I'm taking this from the sikhas. Yeah, I didn't make it up. Good. Now, let's say the milk was treif of milk. Chalav tameh is all discussion in the Gemara. Chalav tameh doesn't really make cheese. So when avchesher comes from a chazir, although today they are making cheeses out of camels. It's a big thing today. I mean, now the United Arab Emirates, these places, Dubai became like Yiddish shtettlach over here, but they're selling over there different cheese products made out of camel milk. That's how that works out. Because the Gemara says that you can't really make cheese out of it. Maybe it's only certain types they can make, not real cheese, only soft cheese. Not exactly sure. But chalav treif, for sure you could have. You have a cow that's treif. And this is one of the major issues today in milk. I think we mentioned back over there when we're talking about the keva, you have the the DA cows displaced Abba Masim. Abba Masim is the keva, is the fourth stomach, and many times it becomes displaced. I think we discussed it back over there in Sim Pezan. And they do a surgery to relieve the pain the cow was having. Pashtus, the cows are having the stomach floating out of place because of the way that they're being raised. So we have more of this than they used to have. It was an unusual condition. So now they correct it with surgery, and often in the process of the surgery, they make a hole in the keva, and the cow becomes a treifa, and then all the milk that comes out of this animal is a treifa, like the animal itself is a treifa. The chalv is also a treifa. So let's say somebody made cheese out of that. So gvina shasuya ruba, either the whole cheese or majority of the cheese, mechalab beim a treifa, came out of a treifa animal. So we're going to call that Isser Machmas Atzmei. But Pashtus, yeah, when the whole thing is treifa milk. So that's Isser Machmas Atzmei. That's going to be a Chticharolis Kabbat. Gvina Suyim Isser Atzmei. Since the milk is Isser Machmas Atzmei, just like a treifa meat is Isser Machmas Atzmei, so the treifa milk is also Isser Machmas Atzmei. So therefore, this cheese, if it was such a cheese, got mixed in with the rest of the cheese, so all these cheeses are going to be come after it's a Chticharolis Kabbat. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, we have cheese that was made mechal of kosher, but the rennet you used to make the cheese was no good. So you thought you were finished with this in Peizayin. Shamidu eisa bekevis nevela, that you used rennet from a nevela, and that was used to make the cheese. It's a davar ha'maimid. So we said davar ha'maimid la bottle. Okay, but it was maimid, the cheese. But that makes a cheese Isser Machmas Atzmei. It doesn't make a cheese Isser Machmas Atzmei. Just like he had the blood falling in, so it's not bottle if it's less than shishim. Over here, it's never going to be bottle. It's a davar ha'maimid, but it doesn't make it Isser Machmas Atzmei. Okay, so therefore, if it was not kosher, the cheese, because it was made with treifa rennet, not kosher rennet, nevela, treifa, whatever it was, it's not going to be chticharolis kabbat. Why not? It absorbed an Isser. Here it's a davar maimid, it's even stronger than a regular Isser blue. But then it's going to become bottle. Bottle, whatever the case is, depending on the din of Taruvos that we're going to learn later about Hilchas. We're mentioning the whole time. But now we have a case in the middle. What's the case in the middle? So I have to introduce the case in the middle. I'm sure you're familiar with this. But we have different gezeres midirabanan, yeah, pasakum, bishalakum, cholavakum, gvinasakum. So cholavakum is milk that was produced without supervision by the milking. So the chachamim wagays, you're not allowed to drink it because maybe got mixed in cholav tummy. Okay, I'm not going through the whole thing with the Ramesha, with the cholava companies. Different discussion. That's the din of cholav. Let's talk about gvinasakum. Gvinasakum, whole discussion in the Gemara. The chachamim answered cheese that was made by a goy. Why did they ask cheese made by a goy? So the Gemara brings all different sorts of reasons, many reasons it brings over there. But the final reason that's settled upon, certainly as far as the Gemara is concerned, as far as the halacha is concerned, is because even if they made it with kosher rennet, but people could get confused with the cheese on the left. Okay, the cheese on the left is treif, right? There was this cheese that was made, this is the last sif in Simon Pei Zayin, that if you made cheese with non-kosher rennet, the cheese is treif. Treif midirabanan. It's not kosher midirabanan. Shame. Davar ha'maimid loy bottle. Okay, but that doesn't mean if it got mixed in with a whole bunch of other cheeses that you're going to answer all the cheeses because a chticharolis kabbat. It's not a chticharolis kabbat. Just because it's treif doesn't mean it's a chticharolis kabbat. Fine. Now, so the cheese that what we call today gvinasakum, even you have today rennetless cheese. They sell rennetless cheese. Go to health food, still rennetless cheese. Somebody doesn't keep cholav yisrael, they're allowed to buy such a cheese? Absolutely not. Even if they drink not cholav yisrael, they're relying on the Ramesh's heter, whatever the case is. But the Ramesh never was matter gvinas akum. Gvinas akum is separate, and you can't tell from looking at the cheese whether it was made from kosher rennet, non-kosher rennet, microbial rennet. Then they used to use different sorts of herbs or grasses, whatever, to make it, different ways of making the cheese. Okay, so it's 100% kosher. If you knew it was kosher milk, let's say you had Cholav Yisrael, the milk was Cholav Yisrael, and then the mashgiach walked out of the room and somebody threw in kosher rennet. Okay, the whole discussion in the dinner of Gvinas Akum, is that enough? But according to many days, that's Gvinas Akum, because a Jew has to make the cheese. A Jew has to put in the rennet. Okay, does he have to put it in? Does he have to own it? Not going into the dinner of Gvinas Akum now. But in any case, it's a very fascinating thing now. So Gvinas Akum Treif. Okay, even if we know 100%, we have Yediyah. The Ramesh by Cholav Akum says the Yediyah is enough, that as if it's Cholav Yisrael, Cholav companies. Okay, but by Gvinas Akum, Yediyah doesn't help. So the fact that you know that a kosher rennet was put in is not sufficient. It's still Gvinas Akum until you have a Yid involved in the cheese making process. Okay, now that's Mitzad Safik, or that's Mitzad Gezeira. It's a Gezeira because of its Safik, we're not sure it's kosher or not. Or it's a Gezeira like Yom Tov Sheni, Bizman Hazeh. L'may nafkamina, who cares? The shaila is, such a cheese, is it going to be also a mutter? So Gvinas Goyim, Shosru Chachamim, Echshashi Yamidu, Bekevis Nevela. We'll call it right, left, and center. The case on the right is the milk with treif. So that's for sure. The one on the left is for sure treif, but it's only treif, not machmasatzmi, because you made it with rennet from the vela. Gvinas Akum, in the middle, the Chachamim answered it. Why? Because you might come to eat the cheese on the left. So Kana ben Shael, is this a Chatich Royal Eskabed or not? And how could you make it worse than the cheese on the left? So along comes the Shach, and the Shach says it's a Vada Yisr. This is a Vada Yisr. This, they made it. What's Pshat of Vada Yisr? The cheese on the left is also Vada Yisr, but it's more than a Vada. It's became the extent that it's Isamach Masatzme. Something which is Isamach Masatzme in the Rabbanim is also Isamach Masatzme Chaticher Olay Skabed. If you have chicken and milk, some hot milk fell on some chicken, okay, it's an Issa Rabbanim, but since it's possible Chalav, it's Isamach Masatzme. Okay, this whole thing applies even to Surim Derabban. So see clear in the Shulchan Aruch Ramah. Okay. So along comes the Shach and says, this thing is now Isamach Masatzme. Who made it Isamach Masatzme? The Chum have the power to make Isamach Masatzme. Whereas the Taz said, how could you say such a thing? How could you call it Chtir Olay Skabed? You only ask for Gvinas Akum because you might come to eat something which is not royal skabed. What's going on over here? How can you make it worse than the thing which is the whole purpose of the Gezerah? The reason the Chachamim prohibited Gvinas Akum is because you might come to eat the case on the left. The reason they asked for the middle case is because you might come to the left-hand case, and the left-hand case is not royal skabed. How could this be worse? How could this be royal skabed? So the Taz is matter this middle case.
We're not concerned for the case on the right. That's not the Gezerah.
The case on the right is not Gezerah, it's mamish treifa. That's for sure royal skabed.
When we say it's also when a guy makes it,
most milk in the world is kosher. The Chachamim are not really worried about that. And we're not gezer. There are many, the list of reasons over there. You know, it's a good example when you're learning about reasons for Gezerah to Rabban. So usually the Gemara gives one reason, but this I think when we learn Bas B'chalav, I brought down Aruch HaShulchan. It brings down to the Chacham just gave us one reason, but the many Dvarim Nistarim that the Chacham had in mind when they made their Gezerahs didn't tell us all of them. Okay, so truth is that all the reasons of Kabbalah, of Chassidus, are not revealed unless you learn Kabbalah and Chassidus. But when it comes to Gvinas, the Akum, at least in the Gemara, you have a whole list of reasons over there. I don't think Chalav Treif is one of them. I don't remember all the reasons in the Gemara. Yeah, they were machlik b'shum and chazer. You're going to put something on the outside. All different sorts of reasons they have over there. Could be that's one of the reasons. I'm not sure. But Lamaisa, we worried about the case on the left. So the Taz says it doesn't make sense that you should make it more chomer than the thing you're being excited. You might come to something, and you're going to come to that something, then it's not going to be all this come. It's going to become bottle. So how could this not become bottle? And that's when the shach comes along. This is get the lashon over here again. You've heard the lashon over here. Everything he wrote is not true. Oh, langa ma'isa from the Taz. So that is a big machlekes of Shach and Taz, and as it comes out that the Rav Poskim hold like the Shach, and they're machmer in such a case. Why isn't the case on the left royal iskaber since it's possible cholov? Yeah, because it's because not possible cholov. If it would be possible cholov, what happens if you would make that case with kosher meat? So the cheese is kosher. That's what we learned in the end of some Peizayin. If you use kosher beef in it, then the cheese would be kosher. Why is it not possible cholov? Davar amayim b'lo.
It's hatter.
Because it's hatter, yeah. So over here, for sure, it's not possible cholov. This is iser.
It's
not going to become
Isser, which is
It's
basar.
not going to become. It's not going to be. It's not also because it's possible cholov. It's also because it's nevela.
But it all there's the added feature, the fact that it's also basar, so that makes it a Isser machmas atzmai. Because it's an avela, but it's also basar.
But if it's not nice and tam, there's no possible cholov. That's why the kosher meat is not going to ask.
But it's my meat, so
It's
it's an
mine. It's
Isser.
a separate issue. If it's a davar maimer and nothing to do whether it's if it was wine, it'd also be a davar maimer. Nothing to do with possible cholov.
Isn't Haroili Skabid more a description of how good or nice the piece is? Is it about how usher it is, or
We're going to have more. Well, this is only condition number one. I think we should go further because we got a lot more to cover over here, and things will come clearer, I think, as we go along. So this is a case. It's an interesting case of Pischei Tshuva, so it's I think I'm a little pretty far behind today. Anyway, we'll have to move a bit faster over here. This is a Pischei Tshuva. It brings from Rabbi Yehuda, interesting case that you had kreplach. Okay, so the case of Rabbi Berel was filled with butter inside, and somehow it got baked in a benyame fleishika pan. So this is what happened. I had this kreplach over here, and there was butter inside, and we put on a fleishika pan. So Rabbi Berel went, and then somehow one or two of these got mixed into some kosher kreplach. These are the treifa kreplach. Because they got, I mean, these kreplach you're looking at don't look like they're baked yet. Whatever the case is, they were baked with fleishik, became basar b'chalav. And now, let's say one or two of these got mixed up with a bunch of others, and you don't have, you have rave, but the shaila is a chaticher rol iskabet. So basar b'chalav, if it's also masad basar b'chalav, so then l'chor it's a chaticher rol iskabet, and you have a problem. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, no, it's not chaticher rol iskabet. Why? Because why is this royal iskabet? Is royal iskabet because of the filling or because of the dough? The chashav part of this meichel, I don't know exactly whether it's this meichel or another meichel, whatever it is Rabbi Yehuda was talking about. He said the main chashivas is not the butter inside. The main chashivas is the dough. Okay? And although it's basar b'chalav, it's what became basar b'chalav was the butter inside became basar b'chalav because it absorbed tam basar. Okay, then that basar b'chalav got absorbed into the dough. Okay, in the dough, which is the part which is choshev, it's iser balua. So the basar b'chalav is iser machmas atzmei, but it's not royal iskabet. Got a teaspoon of butter inside, tablespoon of butter inside is royal iskabet. Lift now orchim. No, the main part of the cheshivas of this meichel is the dough, and that dough is royal iskabet, but it's not iser machmas atzmei. I had absorbed basar b'chalav, but absorbed basar b'chalav. The case where we say basar b'chalav iser machmas atzmei is not that you have basal b'cholav got cooked together, and then you cooked it with some potatoes. And now you can't eat the potatoes because it's absorbed time basal b'cholav. Okay, basal b'cholav is machmas atzmei, potatoes roy l'skabed. No, the potatoes not roy l'skabed. The potatoes just absorb time basal b'cholav. So it's a balua. Basal b'cholav itself. So you remember that if you have a half a hazayas of basar and a half a hazayas of cholav, you cook it together, you get malchus for eating the kazayas. Because it's a brand new iser. Okay, what the part which is roy l'skabed, says the Noda B'Yehuda, is the dough, not the milchiks. So this is a psachidish Rabbi Havlin put together the shir. He wants to say like this: let's say a pizza. Okay, this is like a little different recipe from the one on the right, but it's the same general idea that you have pizza, you have a dough, and then you have the cheese. So what's the main part of the pizza? The cheese or the dough? If we're going to say, there's an argument to say that the main chshivas of the pizza is the cheese, not the dough. First, you can't eat pizza without any dough. You're going to walk around with a handful of melted cheese. But the chshivas of it is not the dough. Give somebody a dough baked without any cheese on it, what kind of pizza is that? Okay, the main chshivas is there. So if that became fleshik, so then you would have a problem with tichar skabed. Even though both of them are basal b'cholav with dough, but in such a case, an argument could certainly be made for the idea to say it's tichar roy skabed. Okay. So now we'll learn Shulchan Aruch inside. We'll have Aleph and Beis, we'll learn it together. So Sif Aleph, Chaticha Roy Skabed, Dina Kaberia. Afil Aleph, Le Betela. Has the same din as Beria that we learned in the previous simon, that it's there's no bittul. Afil Im Hi Asura Ba Na, and even if it's something Asa Ba Na, let me just back up a second. What is my Pshat Afil? He's asking a question over here. Let me ask you something. You have something which is Asa Ba Na. You're going to give it to your guests? If I can't, you're not allowed to give it to your guests. You can't even give it to a nachri. It's also bana. So how what are we worried if things also bana? Din l'skabed roy l'skabed lifnei archim. It's not roy l'skabed at all. It's not even right to give to your dog. It's also bana. What's pshat l'skabed lifnei archim? This explains. It doesn't mean that the machmish gonna eat it. Even shim tisbat loyes u'muteres roy l'skabed. If we would say be bottled, then you'd be allowed to eat it. So like you had in the first slide over there, you had 7 pieces of meat, seven juicy steaks. Yeah, so you got 7 steaks. So one of those steaks is aser. Is that roy l'skabed lifnei archem? Let's say that 7th one was basal b'cholav. They got cooked with milk. So say, roy l'skabed lifnei archem, it's also bana, it's basal b'cholav. Yeah, but if you were matter it with bittul, so then you'd feed it to the archem. That's what it means, roy l'skabed lifnei archem. Doesn't mean your mamash have to actually eat it. It means it's sort of a thing which is a piece which is fit to eat. It's going to help us understand Sif Gimel also, this explanation. Rama is the same thing applies. This is to the Rabbanim. So if the meat was not beef, it was chicken, and then it's possible chalav min derabbanan, but it's also chtichar roy l'skabed. It's also not bottled. V'im was safek im roy l'skabed oilay, and if you have a safek whether it's a chtichar roy l'skabed or not, as lein l'kola, afilu hi asura midiraisa. Not only for the sake of the deraisa, even it's a vadi midiraisa. We're making. So both of these cases, yeah. Fine. So we have over here, even midrabban, even midrabban, we say it's not going to become bottle. But later on, we have in the din of Suffolk, you have Simon Kuf Yud, when they're going to be learning that whole part that's famous. So people learn Taruvos and especially talk about Simon Kuf Yud. So it's a dinis feksveka. You have a shach that goes on pages and pages and pages, all the principles governing the dinim of feksveka. Feksveka is much more complicated than one might think if you never learned Klal feksveka. Okay, so what constitutes a suffix, what not? So the shach over there brings the Kiva Eger quotes it over here. After Bisa the Rabbanan, Yesh Nechticha Leskabit, Shena Batela. Avo Bedavar Sha'asa Rak Mitzad Chumra. If it's not even an Ism of the Rabbanim, it's just like a Chumra. Kagin Bosa Shenesalam Min Ayin. We have a similar Shulchan Aruch, Bosa Shenesalam Min Ayin. We have Machlekes, Machaber Ramah, about what it means. You know, people want to explain the din of Bosa Shenesalam Min Ayin. The guy was on a plane and he had a kosher meal and he went to the bathroom, came back, didn't eat it because Bosa Shenesalam Min Ayin. The Remes is, according to the Ramah, I don't want to spoil the story, but there's very little halachically. You don't have a. It's a whole case the Gemara talks about. So they had heads of behemoths. There was kosher ones, not kosher ones. Fell in the river, and you pull the head of the behemoth out. There's a kosher, not kosher. So the din of Boston Shalom and Ayin. So we're machmer on it, but it's not like beikar adin that you have to be machmer on such a thing. So then I feel if it's not even Isser Vadid the Rabbanim, it's an Isser that's only Matzad Chumra, so the Shach brings down over there and Dinas Fexveka that it's not going to have the Chumra of a Royal Skabit. So that's a kula. These very, very strict dinim we have over here. Nevertheless, we do have this kula. Fine. Siv base. As we learned before, Barucha, it's only going to have this chumrah that it's not batul because roy l'skabed. If it is machmas atzma, can gain nevelo basa b'cholov, like nevelo basa b'cholov. But if it was only iser balua, it's prohibited because it absorbed the taste of something prohibited. And there didn't have 60 times to nullify it. So even the opinion that the Ramah holds like that the din of Chtichanas and Nevela Chanan is not only Basu B'chalav, he's in Bashari Suram. So the Mechaber was aware that there's such an opinion. Yeah, he doesn't paskin like that. He paskins like only Basu B'chalav, not Bashari Suram. But it comes to add over here that din of Nas and Nevela doesn't mean Isser Machmas Atzmi. It means you measure it like Isser Machmas Atzmi. So it's Nas and Nevela, but it doesn't have the same din of Nevela regarding this din. So a real Nevela is going to be Isser Machmas Atzmi and it's Afil Bel Flei Bottle because it's Chtichroy Skabit. But it was only Nas and Nevela. So even if you hold with all your heart, you paskin that it's Chtichroy Nas and Nevela B'Shari Surim, that doesn't mean it becomes Chtichroy Skabit. This is we learned this all outside before. Now the Ramah adds a couple of important points. Very interesting now. I mentioned this before, the case of the blood going into the meat, I described as the blood dripping into the meat. Let's say the blood was never taken lechatchila out of the meat. So maybe we could say that this meat was never kosher. You're not allowed to eat this meat like this. You have to get the blood out. This piece of meat is full of blood. You got to take the blood out. You got to do malicha. You have to salt it to get the blood out. Otherwise, you're not allowed to eat the meat. Can we call that Isser Machmas Atzmei? Says the Ramah, no. No. Why? Because not Machmas Atzmei. It's Isser Balua. And even if you never salted the piece of meat and it still has blood in it, it's bottle. We don't say this chumrah of royal skabit. Why? The meat itself is not osir. Rachmachmas dam habaluaba. The trumas hadeshin. So Meidike sheds light on the subject. Is a balua doesn't in order to not confuse everybody. So use the example of the blood dripping into the meat. But the same thing would be if the blood was never taken out of the meat. It's also the balua. What do you mean the meat's not usher? This meat, of course, is usher. How are you saying the meat's not usher? The meat's usher because it's full of blood. The meat is kosher, but it's got blood inside. You got to take out the blood before you can eat the meat. That's called isser balua. Fine. And final din from the Ramah and if it was only usher kadei klippa, the top layer, then it's bottle. Daria Klippa in Royal Skabit, like claiming Royal Skabit. You have all discussion in Shach over there. It discusses this din. First of all, what is it talking about? So the Shach learns if you had iri klirishin, if you're pouring from a klirishin, so asur kedei klipa. So let's say you poured some milk, some hot milk from a klirishin on top of a piece of meat. Okay, so it's basal b'cholav, the top layer asur kedei klipa. Okay, so now you take this whole piece. Let's say there's one of those steaks we had in the first slide over there, and somebody poured the hot milk on top of it, and now it's also kedei basal b'cholav kedei klipa, the top part of it. Now, is the whole steak roilas kabed, or is only that top layer roilas kabed? It's only the top layer that's basal b'cholav. The rest is not basal b'cholav. Okay, if you cut off that little layer, you're gonna go and say, "Oh, my honored guest," and you have this little paper thin piece of meat, and you give it to them. This kabed lifnei orchim. What kind of business? When are you giving me a piece of paper to eat? Aside from the fact it's basal b'cholav, but even if it would not be, that's not something which is roilas kabed lifnei orchim. So in the Cheveres, it brings on a Kaf HaChaim, says, Kedei Natila, maybe then, yeah, Shach brings down, according to this, if I had to, you could have a case that even if it's the Kedei Klipa, could be roilas kabed. But in general, we say that it's not roilas kabed if it's only also Kedei Klipa, and that is the din of the Ramah. Fine. Any questions before we proceed? Right. This was all the first, the three conditions, by the way. The first condition has to be a smachim satzma. What was the second condition? That's, by the way, most of the time, Tanai, number 2, be ches hey lamidus chaticha haruya liskabit. Sometimes they have a reish, ches reish lamid, it's sometimes abbreviated, but that's abbreviation of chaticha haruya liskabit. Chanan is, of course, chaticha nas nevei. Mochan lagosh has to be fit to serve. So how fit does it have to be? So we end up having 4 opinions of when it's prepared. So what do you have to, you have a chicken, the chicken's walking around, okay? It's now even in a chai, I mean, you can't exactly give it to a guest. I prepared for you, my dear guest, a whole chicken. A whole chicken for me, I'm so honored. Takes a live chicken, puts on his plate. What's he supposed to do with it? He can't eat that. So the shaila is, does it have to be mamish, completely finished in the form that you can eat it, or it has to be somewhat prepared? So that is a basic machlekes. We have an opinion, and it's going to be opinion 4, which is that it has to be mamish, ready to eat. That's the opinion of Ramban. Ramban holds chaticha roilas kabed lifnei orchim means mamish lifnei orchim. You got to give it to them in the hand, and they'll be able to eat it. But there's another 3 opinions that say you don't need to get the complete last stage of preparation ready to eat. You have to do some preparation. How much preparation? So we got 4 opinions. Opinion number 1, you just have to shecht it. The rosh, the tor, I feel eif shalom in the tzeis, I've even still got the feathers on. You shechted it, it's got the feathers on it over there. That's all core, already has the chumrah of a chaticha roilas kabed. That's opinion number 1. The smack says you got to take the feathers off. I mean, it's a big pain in the neck. I don't know if you ever took feathers off a chicken before, but it's a big job taking the feathers off. So even if the afsha off shalom, even if it's whole, it's a whole chicken, and whole chicken means you didn't even clean out the kishkas from the inside. You didn't even cut it open, but at least you took off the feathers. Smak says good enough. That's already called a chaticha roilas kabed. It's not going to become bottle. And by the way, this is what happened in the shlachtos. If something gets mixed up, you got a nevela, you got a treifa. So when did you find it? It was right after the shechita, like kaparis. Let's say it was a treifa, nevela. You put it in the side, and then things in Erev Yom Kippur, and it's busy, and you have the nachrim. They're putting things back and forth, and he took it. What happened to the treifa chicken I put over here? Just by the way, you have in a shlachtos by the bigger animals, so you label the kosher ones and you track them, and the nevelas will go straight to the goyim, and there's so many of them that unless we have clear simonim on the kosher ones, we assume it's treif. But by the chickens, most of them are kosher, so you have to have good hashkach on the treifa ones to make sure they don't get mixed up back in. You have to have labeling. You have labeling on the treifa ones too. In any case, so you could get it mixed up over here in the first stage, You get mixed up in the second stage too, after the feathers were already, after the flicking. The Rashba is the third opinion, that if it's a whole chicken, you can't eat it either. It has to be in pieces. Even if you didn't cook it yet, so he's not going to eat raw chicken. Okay, but at least this is something which is, it's just lacking the last stage. You just have to cook it. Everything else is already prepared. And they got the Ramban, the Ra, Rak Achish Abosir, is Bashal Muchen Lagasha, a mamish ready to serve. Then it's going to be a Chatich Lo Hiskabet. Okay, and that's the way the Machaber Paskins. Machaber Paskins that only if it's ready to mamish serve lifnei orchim, so then it's not going to become bottom. Okay, but the Ramah, he does bring down the Machaber, and it's an interesting discussion. Machaber quotes this din, and then he says at the end of the Sif, Yesh Cholkim. Yeah, Yesh Cholkim b'chol zeh. Yesh Cholkim b'chol zeh, I mean, it doesn't have to have all of these, the final preparation. You can have less preparation. So be'ikar adin, it's like the Ramah says any one of these preparations is okay. But l'maisa, the Ramah is not going to go so far to be mat like the Rosh. He says that you're going to have to take the feathers off. Okay, we'll soon see inside the Ramah. There's taking the feathers off the chicken, there's taking the skin off the larger animal. You know, at what point, taking off the wool, at what point do we have this similar, this similar inyan of preparation? So we'll soon see inside the Machaber Ramah. Piskei Teshuva brings down over here that, you know, normally we do. I'm going to say before the Machaber brings the first. He doesn't say Yeshemrim v'Yeshemrim. Then it's like the two opinions are evenly weighed in the eyes of the Machaber. He brings down the Stam v'Yesh Emrim or Stam v'Yesh Cholkim. It first brings down the beginning of the Sif without saying Yesh Emrim. And then at the end he says Yesh Emrim or Yesh Cholkim. So there's also a klali aposkim. How do you look at such a thing? Sometimes there's machlekes, and over here there's also machlekes. Does he mean to say, if he doesn't paskin like that, so why does he bring it down b'chlal? Does he mean lechatchil you should be cheshish, but b'diavad it's okay? Does he mean it's only a bal nefesh should be machmer? All discussion, kafachayim, all the klali aposkim, how it is that we learn what the Machaber says when he brings the Bastam, and then he brings the Yesh Cholkim. But B'nai Ashkenaz, it doesn't matter to us anyway, because the Ramah doesn't pass like this Machaber. He says Yesh Neigin, that we do like it says in like that previous stages of preparation are also sufficient, and you don't have to wait till the last stage of preparation. Just one other thing that I'm going to mention here, and depending on the situation, there could be some variance, but we discussed previously, previous shiurim, about Neda HaTaruvos. That's often it's relevant when it is you found out about the Taruvos. So let's say one of the chickens was treif and it ended up going on the line. I think I brought you the case over there that somebody they shechted a chicken and didn't notice that had 3 legs. You don't normally check chickens to see if they have more than 2 legs, because whoever saw one, okay, and they hung it up on the line and saw over there. Usually they don't look at it. To mazel, they caught it and they found over there 3 legs on chicken. I kind of mashkechem would have found it later on anyway. But lepeil, let's say it got mixed in, and also it'd be, you'd find out, then it. You take it out, and then you don't ask the taruvos anymore. It's not going to ask the taruvos. It doesn't absorb the taste. Okay, and even if it did, then that's not the royal iskabed. The taste is not royal iskabed. Only the thing itself is royal iskabed, just like we had by Beria. Okay, but let's say it got mixed up in such a way you couldn't tell. So did you find out about it when it still had the feathers on, and you found out about it when after the feathers were taken off? So that's a whole discussion prima godim if it matters when it is, whether you go after Shas Yediyah or not. Some cases we go after Shas Yediyah, some cases we don't. That's just something to be aware of. Now, Chalakim Sheinim Bebehemo Ba'if. Now you have a whole discussion over here about different portions, what's royal iskabed or not. So you see, we're not going through all of these numbers over here. This was just taken from some butcher's book showing how to labeling the different parts of the cow. They all have different names to it, but I guess just to be mamchish, the different pieces, what's called royal iskabed or not. Now, this whole discussion is colored by the general din that it goes after the time and the place. So there's a whole discussion if anyway we're going to pass, and it goes after the time and the place. So why is it that the Shulchan Aruch bothers to speak about particular pieces of meat, whether they're royal iskabed or not? If it really doesn't matter anyway, it depends on the time and the place. So, lung meat used to be considered a delicacy. Many things were considered to be delicacies in years past. Today, it's not against the law to sell lung meat. The lungs from animal go into dog food. Here there are places in the world, it's not in China they allow it, but the Western countries, they don't allow things like this. So it changes according to time and the place. So why is it the Shulchan Aruch speaks about it? It's all machlekes haposkim. There are those that say that the things that the Shulchan Aruch says, royal iskabed, there's nothing what to talk about. That's for sure, Asr. Things that Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about. So then it goes according to time and the place. And the others say, no, what it says Shulchan Aruch lav dafke. It's just giving examples that at that time, and those places where they lived, those were iskabed. But every place goes according to what it is in the time and place. I mean, you have a similar discussion, not exactly the same, but you have by the dinim of chatzitza. That depends if it's person's makbid, person's not makbid. So if it depends on a person's makbid or not, so why does it talk about this type of ink and that type of tar and this type of blood and this type of pus and this type of scab? Anyway, I'm not learning dinim of chatzitza now. Let's get down to the case at hand. So let's talk about heads. Heads. Today, nobody eats head, even though it brings down in Shulchan Aruch about for Pesach getting the head. Rosh Ayil. So there are places you get a Rosh Ayil over here. You have the Sephardic butcher shops over here. They sell Rosh Ayil. I mean, I haven't seen for a few years, but they used to have Pesach time. They used to have the head. So the head, what do you do with it? So you could eat the head. You eat the whole head. You don't eat the whole head, but there is meat. They go off the skin. There's part meat over there. So what it brings down over here from the poskim, the Shulchan Aruch, that if it's an egel, if it's a calf, it's a young animal, then it's royal iskabed. But if it's the head of a chicken, the head of a bird, or behemoth, or the head of a grown animal, ain't a royal iskabed. It's not called a royal iskabed. So that's that doesn't have a chshivas to it. So this is it's actually interesting because you have from the Matnas Kuhuna, this, by the way, is the third condition. Didn't write Tanai Shlishi over here, but we've moved on to the third condition. The first condition was that it's Ismach Masatzme, not just Isublu. Then the second condition that has to have reached a certain stage of preparation. And the third, that has to be Choshuv, L'skab Lifnei Orchem. So we have in the Matnas Kuhuna, you have the cheeks. The cheeks you gave to the Kain. Now you gave the keva to the Kain also. Okay, the keva you could say you gave to the Kain because you can make cheese out of it. There are mafarshim that say that. Okay, but what's with the l'chayayim? So the l'chayayim includes the tongue. So you give the cheeks together with the tongue. So the tongue, you see over here, the tongue is for sure alei skabed. Avram Avinu gave the malachim. So that's a lashon is for sure royal skabed lifnei orchem. But the cheeks, it just says cheeks, but it means the cheeks together with the tongue. Where myself, I never, to my knowledge, had it, but all the Rashachtim say that the cheek meat is the ideal meat for cholent. I remember when I was learning Shchita, used to go to Shlachtos, so the Moshe Ruben was one of the Rashachtim, and they let them take, there were people that they let them take these pieces, the Shlachtos wasn't selling them, he took the cheeks for himself. You have to do Nikur on it, the Malicha versteht sich. Anyway, take it, he would say, Man has gone, he would take it home, and he says, the best. I heard from other people also that's the best for shalom. Shame, cheek meat. Anyway, but over here it says that for the behemoth it's not the roy. Maybe it's only the whole head is not the roy l'skabed. You only have a little bit of cheek meat over there. But an egel, evidently, there's more edible meat over there. It's softer because it's younger. That's as far as the head and the tongue. What about the skin? So on a goose skin, don't knock it if you didn't try it. I also didn't try it. But avos from a barvis is a duck and avos is a goose. So that skin, they would make a whole meichel out of it and make fried skin, fried skin, cooked skin, whatever they did with it. It was royal skabit. So the Marshal doesn't agree, but the Rav Poskim held that the goose skin is royal skabit lifnei orchim. We're gonna have soon more of a discussion of that soon. But other type of birds, chicken skin. He said, "Oh, my dear guest, here, give him a plate of chicken skin." It's not royal skabel now, and skin from a behemoth is for sure not royal skabel. But from a goose is a different story. Doesn't talk about ducks over here. Fine. What about feet? So feet, you the Yidden make pcha out of it. You take the hooves. I mean, the hooves are full of collagen. That's what they make gelatin out of, from the bones and things. So for Behema Gasa, it's royal skab, and so too from geese. What do they do with the feet of the geese? Zwischen uns gerät, I have no idea. It's not talking over here about the pulke. It's talking about the bottom part, which has scales on it. The webbed feet over here. We're talking about the last paddock over here, the last joint over here. For Behema Daka and Aphis, other birds, it's not royal skabit. So when I was in one of the yeshivas, I had in meals that were not exactly shulchan malachim punkt. So Shabbos or a soup, you have to have chicken soup, but they couldn't afford chickens. What do they do? So they bought the feet and they made chicken. They took the chicken feet and they made soup out of it. Don't knock it if you didn't try it. Shame. But they say it's royal skabel lifnei orchim, chicken feet. No, it's not. And Behema Daka, they write that it's also not. Behema Gasa, again, today you're going to give a person a foot of an ox. I don't really see it, but anyway, the poskim say from Behema Gasa. Behema Gasa is a larger animal. Behema Daka, a cow, or an ox. But Behema Daka is either a younger animal, like a calf, usually say under a year old, but that would be called a daka, and also sheep and goats are considered to be a behema daka. Now, what about the insides? So you have a korkaban, and you have the bnei meyayim. So we're soon going to see inside the Shulchan Aruch. So again, if it's a goose, it's a larger bird, and there's more to eat over there. So then it's called a royal skabit. But a behema daka and aphes is not called a royal skabit. And about a behema gasa, we'll soon see inside the Shulchan Aruch, especially the shuman akanta, shaliyada meyayim ein a royal skabit. So brought along a little show and tell over here, just as you can see everything, what it is we're talking about over here. So it's a famous, it's a joke, the whole discussion Shulchan Aruch about if there was a puncture to the korkaban. So somebody brought a shiloh chicken to the Rav, and the Rav says, if it's a korkaban, it's like this. If you didn't know what a korkaban looked like, you learned all the dinim from the Shulchan Aruch. You learned Hilchas Taruvos. You don't see the animal. When I learned Hilchas Taruvos, we had to learn. In my days, you had to learn for Smicha, you had to learn Taruvos. I didn't have a dream that I'd ever be using it, but in any case, had to relearn it anyway. But there's a famous statement, you probably heard it before. It says, "Oh, das is the heilige korkaban was the retzach and shachantaz." This is the holy korkaban that the shachantaz were talking about. It's Teiras Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. So shachantaz, we're all talking about the din of a korkaban. So this is the holy korkaban, says in shachantaz. So b'chlal, anybody ever saw a chicken that had wrapped up, the raw chicken wrapped inside was like a neck with the different pieces inside? Did any of you guys ever see that before? This is like from the days of the horse and buggy, lifting that tzimtzum. They used to sell chickens like this. So it was a raw chicken, and you had wrapped up inside, there would be the neck, the liver, and they called it the giblets. So the giblets was a korkaban. Sometimes they put the heart inside also. That was like the old-time butchers, that's what they put inside the chicken.
And
The
when you
heart.
get cases, sometimes you get a case that has a bag with necks, a bag with schmaltz, and a bag with livers.
Oh.
So I've
Korkaban
seen
nut.
it like that.
Korkaban nut. Okay. Here's
yeah, I
inside
don't
the
think so.
chicken. So this is like somebody exploded this chicken over here. And this is not, I got the sefer, this is a regular sefer over there. It's not because I live in Quebec that the whole thing's in French over here. Here's the Loshen Kodesh on the bottom. But here's the whole thing blown up over here. So you see this over here, this is the liver here, and this is the korkaban over here. You have over here the zefek of im hameira im neitzosa that they threw on the side of the mizbeach over here. That's the first stage, is a little sack over there called the zefek. And then this is the stomach of the chicken, the korkaban. So that is full of all the garbage. So tamamish has a terrible smell if you open it up. If you're kashing the chicken, you have to, it's a job to take off and make sure you don't puncture it. Otherwise, you're going to make a big mess. But just so you can see from the kishkas over here, this is the hadar dakanta of a chicken, but it's really more relevant over there by the behemoths. So what it looks like in real life, maybe I'll just hold off on the pictures if I have time at the end, because we are running late, and we're going to talk about this inside the Machaber. So we'll learn first inside the Shulchan Aruch, and then if we have time, we'll look at we'll do a little show and tell. Okay, so yeah, let's just finish this piece over here. Okay, so now let's learn inside Sef Gimel. And I think we'll do, what time is it now? Okay, let's see if we can do Dalit here also. At least Gimel will do. Tarnagelis Maneit Sosa. A chicken, the Machaber is going to hold that any of these preliminary stages of preparation are insufficient to call the Chticha Shroilis Kabel Lifnei Orchim. So Tarnagelis Maneit Sosa. If you have a chicken, it still has its feathers. Shenisarve Bacheres. And it got mixed up with other chickens. All these chickens have feathers. But Taylor, it's bottle. Because it's not fit to honor guests the way it is. All his feathers on. And even though later on, after it got mixed up, you took off the feathers. So it got mixed up, and then they took off all the feathers. So now you're going to say, okay, now it doesn't have any feathers anymore. So that's still not enough. It's not going to be considered a chtich royal iskabed. It's not going to be a bottle unless it was cooked. And so too, if you gave a whole sheep. Now, a whole sheep is not as big as it looks. Most of it's wool. Especially a small sheep, it's not so big. You say the Korban Pesach, everybody has to eat a kazayas. You can't leave anything open. They can't leave anything over, otherwise it's neisar. So, like, a whole sheep is not very big. By the time you finish during the nikkur on it and taking off everything, there's not necessarily so big. This is Korban Keva Shalom is talking without the skin. You took the skin off already. Otherwise, it's certainly no better than the chicken with its feathers on. So even you brought a raw sheep. Say, oh, your mamish, a whole sheep. What a covered. Okay, but it's not cooked. Not only that, you brought a roast. Mamish made it. You take a big fat roast and you put it in front of your guest. So the guy might think, wow, honestly, the whole roast, this roast is big enough for 20 people. Okay, so according to the Machaber, that's not called a royal iskabed. You don't give a person a piece of meat like that. That's not called royal iskabed. That's not the normal way to feed your guests, to give them a whole sheep or a whole big piece of meat. Okay, it has to be cooked and it has to be proper size. And then he brings down the Machaber, and those that disagree, and the Ramah says, we do like the Yesh Cholkim, says the Ramah. Milvad, except for Tarnagelus Benetzoso. If the chicken still has its feathers, the Mechuseres Maisa Godel, the Negin Boshi Betela. Our minig is that in such a case, it's bottle. And again, you might say, well, so how often does this happen? It's become a minig. So when you're shechting chickens, it's very easy for such a thing to happen. Especially when people are doing it in their backyard and things are not so masudar, industrially, you arranged in some sort of seder, some sort of system. Okay? So that's why we said that Ramah passing like the second day. So too, the leg of an animal or its head, and you didn't burn off the hair. But if you did burn off the hair, even if it's not only it's not cooked, it's not even salted, but you took off the feathers of the chicken and you took off the hair from the animal, so then it's already royal iskabed according to the Ramah. And that was the second opinion that we had before, the opinion of the smak. I feel the kevashalim ain't a bottle. And even a whole sheep, as long as you took off the outside, then that can be bottle. If you didn't take off the outside, it's like a chicken with the feathers. But the feet of birds, with the exception of the goose, the feet of the goose. In our countries, the legs of a behemoth, the legs of goats and sheep, they have no chashivas to it. Nobody is interested in chicken feet. Nobody's interested in goat or sheep feet. They have no chashivas b'medinas elu, and therefore they're bottle. And the reish shaleifas ain't a chashuv a bottle. And the head of a bird is also not a chashuv. And we brought those that are held by other by hemagasa. Also, the same thing applies. That's what we learned before. Okay, we'll do a dalit. And hey, shuman akanta. That is the fat which is on the colon. Show you a picture in a second. Is also not considered a chetichar iskabed. Avol shuman avas mikroil iskabed vein a bottle. But the skin says shuman avas, which literally is the fat. So you could have a membrane on the outside of the fat of the goose. I'm not sure that's what they're talking about. Could very well be they're talking about gribbenis, like when you cook schmaltz. So the part of it liquefies and you're left with the solid pieces, which is like the skin. So maybe that they were talking about, well, that's mischabes. So if it's a chicken, you have these little tiny pieces. But if it's a goose, you could end up with, I guess, a whole big piece over there. I'm not sure what the or shuman avos is talking about. Probably that's what it's talking about. So that's mikroil iskabed vein a bottle. That's a chtichroil iskabed. And hey, korgabon became sharp b'nei ma'ayim. So the korgabon, stomach of a bird, and so too the other internal organs of an animal, einam robim iskabed, are called not roy iskabed. Okay, so we went an hour and a half already. So we have some more to say about this, but I think it's time for a break. So it's now, is it possible there's a mistake in slide 6? It's going to be the case in yeah. Oh, you're comparing my PowerPoint with the one, because you all got the chaveres. I guess I shouldn't do that. Yeah, I changed the slide. Yeah, somebody made me a private message. Okay, so I guess I better point that out so it shouldn't confuse people. This slide over here, by the way, I changed. Okay, the one you have in your chaveres and the original one had the taz on the right and the shach on the left. I reversed it because I thought it's easier to remember like this, because since the shach is machmer, it goes together with this case, and the taz is mekel, it goes together with this case. Sorry if I messed you up, but I am a bit of a, let me pause the recording. Okay, so this is the slide we learned Mechaber Ramah, Sev Gimel, Sev Dalet, and Sev Hey. I should just mention over here that we had this basic machlekes mechaber Ramah. How much preparation do you need until it's considered to be chaticha rola iskabed? And the mechaber holds that you have, like the Ramban and the Ra, that you have to bring it down to the point where it's cooked and it's ready to serve. And it brings the Yesh Cholkim, the Ramah says, Kain Neigin, that as long as you took the feathers off, even if you didn't clean it out yet, you didn't salt it, but as long as the feathers were taken off, then it's already chaticha rola iskabed. So the Pesach Tshuva over here, Sifkot and Daled, brings down L'chsam Sefer. Just in general, there are different maduras, so that's why you have always the L'chsam Sefer. If you notice in the Pesach Tshuva, it brings down in square brackets L'chsam Sefer from a later version. In any case, so he brings down all those that agree with the Mechaber, and although the Ramah says Yesh Cholkim, but he says that if he could find another reason to be mekel, and if it's a hefsed meruba, writes over here, hitarti behefsed meruba me'ed sha'olu lehefsed kama meis. It was a very, very big hefsed, so he relied on the mechaber with hefsed meruba, a big hefsed meruba, but together with another kula, because it was the treif itself was also a question when it is exactly that it became a suffix. They found the machat inside, found the needle inside the animal. In any case, he was able to find another sword to be mater b'chal the treifa. So there is such a thing as being mater under some conditions. Now, we brought down a few times this shach dilnei l'mishtanim l'fi hamakom bazman makol tul be'ene reis hameira. It all depends on the Rav as to figure out whether, according to the time and the place, whether it's indeed a chaticha rola iskabed or not. You know, Meira Heral mistaping him rola iskabed efshul hakol. So let's say the Meira Heral is not sure. He's not sure whether chaticha rola iskabed or not. He doesn't know for whatever reason. The piece is on the borderline, or he's not sure what exactly the minig is. So it's interesting. The Pri Megadim brings down Minchas Yankiv that says, if he's not sure, that's not called really a suffix. What you want to say over here is that since he's mistapik of Zorelis miskabed, yeah, so it's only Yisud Rabban, Sfek Rabban Lakula. But if you remember in the very first year, when we were talking about the case of Nishbach, in the case of a suffix, then we said that if it was Nishbach, Isser into the heter, and the machlekes mechaber, you taste it, you mashar b'shishim. Whole discussion in the beginning of Tzadach. So he said that's only if it was nishbach and it's impossible to figure out anymore. But if it's still there in front of you and you just don't know how to figure out whether it's Nathan Tam or not, that's called chesron yediyah. Chesron yediyah is not called the suffix b'chlal. So the Minchas Yankiv wants to know why would you be making on such a case? Chesron yediyah is not a suffix. So we say sfeged rabban makula. So if you have a suffix, whether it's a chaticha rola iskabed or not, so then you can be mekel. But if it's a chesron yediyah, says Minchas Yankiv, why should you be mekel? So he brings them, God brings them a pritayat. Says no, in this case, even a chesron yediyah is not a problem, and the Pri Megadim paskins lamaisa like that if the Rav can't figure out for whatever reason, if it's supik, whether it's rola iskabed or not, nevertheless you can be mekel. Fine. Now let's get back to Ritzuos Eif Avos. So we just had before about the Milvad Ragli Avos. Excuse me, where is it here? Over here in Sivdal, the Ramah Aval Ershom and Avos Mikroilas Kabit. So you have a discussion over here about what happens if you have something which it's only royal iskabed if you have a bunch of them together. So in the case of Ritzuos, you had the pieces of skin from the goose. So if you have a bunch of them together, so it's royal iskabed. But each piece by itself is not the royal iskabed. Let's say it's a Michael royal iskabed b'kamus gadela. So this is, I guess, a picture of shvarma. Shvarma, you cut into little tiny pieces. So you say, I want some shvarma. How much you want? I want a little shawarma. So he gives him one little strip of meat over there. What kind of, the royal skabit? I mean, even if you say shawarma is royal skabit, but one little piece of it is not. Let's say you want meatballs. So here you have on the, over here, the second from the right, you have a bowl of meatballs. You have a guest and you give him one meatball in a bowl. I mean, meatballs might be royal skabit. You invite somebody for sketty and meatballs, okay? Michael Choshev, good. But one meatball is not Choshev. So that's a shaila. What happens when you have such a case? When you have a bunch of them, it's royal skabit. But if you don't have a lot of them, then it's not royal skabit. There's a machlekes, Shach and Taz. Yeah, the Taz says that it's still called a royal skabit because you have a bunch of them together. And the Shach says no, it's not called royal skabit lifnei orchim because you need a whole bunch of them together. So if it's a chaticha, it doesn't just say royal skabit; it says a chaticha royal skabit lifnei orchim. Okay? So it has to be something which is that's not really the Shach's reasoning, but that's the easy way to remember it. That he wants this whole the whole piece. If it's you need a bunch of pieces to get together, so you can't say any of them is ain't a bottle because of its chshivas. If one of them its own is not choshev, it's only going to come choshev. If it has a bunch of his friends taking along a bunch of the other pieces, so then that's not enough to make it qualify as chidduch or skabed, and to say it's not bottle, the Shach doesn't want to say that. Taz says even such a case, you're going to say it's not bottle. Okay, machlekes Shach and Taz. We pass like the Shach. Okay, another machlekes is you have let's say you have some breast meat. Okay, so you have schnitzel. Chaza avish ahusarayri. Schnitzel. So they're selling the schnitzel with the skin or without the skin. So b'chal it's more chashuv with the skin. So today people are making schnitzel and they're frying it something. They're putting another layer. So even if it's easier for them to sell it, to take the skin off, that's masad. It's easier to prepare, easier to pack, whatever the case is. But then the people, instead of just giving just a piece of chicken like that, they'll put something on top of it, so it's not artificial skin, but they'll put some sort of breading, some sort of thing on it to give it, make it more of a Michael Choshev. But if you just have that piece of meat by itself without the skin, it was more Choshev with the skin on than with the skin off. So it loses some of its chshivas when you took off the skin. So the Marshal says that even if the piece you're left with in the end would still be royal chabad lifnei orchim, you can give a piece of schnitzel without skin, still a Michael Choshev. But since it was hurd megdulase, it went down in level from its chshivas, the Marshal says no longer royal chabad. Why? Because it's there was a godly mimeno. In its original form, it was more choshev. So it's not royal skabed if you somehow decreased its quality as a result of doing something. In that case, taking off the skin, then it's no longer a royal skabed, it's going to be bottle. And the Taz does not agree. The Taz says it's still royal skabed. If now, okay, it was even more royal skabed, maybe even more choshev orchim, it would be fit for if it had the skin too. But if without the skin, it's still royal skabed lifnei orchim. So then it's a chaticha royal skabed, then it's not bottle. So therefore, the Taz answers it even if the skin was taken off. The Marshal says no, since it went down in level, nevertheless, it's going to be bottle. So Lamaisa, they're all paskin like the Shach over here in the right hand case. They paskin like the Shach L'Kula, but in the left-hand case, that it was Hurad Mechishivuse, they paskin like the Taz L'Chumra. So that's the final word on these cases. So now let's move on to the next set of dinim. Siv Vav. So now we have another another way that it could become no longer a liskabit. Let's say it lost its form. So here, this was our original case we had at the beginning. Sif Aleph, we have a bunch of big pieces of meat. There's a piece of nevela here. Now the whole thing got mixed in. You can't tell which one is which. So we say they're all prohibited because you got a chaticha or liskabit over there, filabel flay bottle, even if 999 other pieces of kosher meat, or even more, it's not bottle, and all of them are prohibited. But let's say it got chopped up. So you took one of these pieces and you chopped it up. So you took it out, somebody started eating the piece of meat, and he starts cutting it up, and you say, wait a second, we're missing what happened to the nevela. We're supposed to go to the delivery man. And he said he doesn't have it anymore. So, oh, that piece that was sitting on the counter, yeah, I threw it in the oven. And then it all got mixed together now. Okay? Meanwhile, the guy took one of these steaks off, and he's cutting it into pieces. And now it's cut into pieces. So now, the din is very interesting din. That one piece that's sitting over there, that got cut into pieces now, since now it's in pieces, so the pieces are no longer a liskabit. Yeah. So the shaila, can we say now, what's the story with that piece? So he says like this, Shulchan Aruch says, Monafshach, that steak that got cut into pieces, you're allowed to eat. What's the Monafshach? So either it's one of the kosher pieces or it's the non-kosher piece. So if it's the kosher piece, then for sure you can eat it. It's a kosher piece. Let's say it's a non-kosher piece. It's not the roy liskabit anymore. So it doesn't have the chumrah of a chaticha roy liskabit anymore. So once it's cut into pieces, so again, this is something which runs into, and we'll soon see in Shulchan Aruch, it runs into the whole din of Mavat List L'Chatchil that we learned in Simon Tzadik Tes. So if it was done b'mezid, it's going to be aser anyway, at least to the one that did it and the one he did it for. But if it was done b'shegeg, so this is also like a way of being Mavatal Isser. If you remember when we learned last week in Simon Kuf about a beria, so you took the fruit and you made a smoothie out of it. So now it's in pieces, ois beria, it's batal b'shishim. But if you know there's bugs in there, you're not allowed to do it. It's muchzak b'tolim, you're not allowed to do it. If you cleaned it, so we had the whole case of Trumas Hadesh, and we discussed that if you cleaned it as best you could, and then it's already a suffix, and it's not muchzak b'tolim anymore, so then you have a prohibition of vatal isla chatchila. You don't have a prohibition of vatal suffix isla chatchila. That's what we learned over there by Beria. But the inyan of vatal isla is not just adding there should be more than shishim. It's also that if whatever was causing it to not be bottle, you took away that cause. So in the case of a beria, it was not bottle because it was whole. So if you smash it up, you had bugs in the wheat, and then they ground up the wheat. So it was done b'shegeg, or if it was only a suffix, then it's going to be bottle. But if it was done on purpose, then we have a problem about the list of chatchil, but done b'mezid. So then we had the machlekes mechaber amav that if it's only said the rabbanim, so then you're allowed to, according to the mechaber, you can't be mavatal it directly, but you can be mavatal it indirectly by adding moheter. In any case, over here, once it's in pieces, so again, Dick, no, we don't have this chumrah. So there was only one piece that fell in. Now you cut up one piece. So this whole taruvos, it was done b'shegeg. So there's no more taruvos to answer the thing anymore. The royal liskabit became bottle. It was cut into pieces. So manavshach. If it was a piece that was aser, so we don't know. There's no longer in existence a royal liskabit. And if it's a piece of the mutters, it's a piece of mutters. For sure, you're allowed to eat it. That's in Shulchan Aruch. So if one piece was taken out of the taruvos now, and it was cut into pieces, so now that piece you're allowed to eat. What's with the rest of the pieces? Let's say there were 7 steaks over here. You took off one, you got 6 left. What's the dinner to 6? Dinner to 6, you're not allowed to eat any of the 6. Because this piece, we can say manavshach. Either it's the kosher one or it's the treifa one. Okay, but we still have to worry that one of those 6 is the treifa one. One of these 6 is the nevela, and therefore those 6 are still us. It's only a maybe. So this one that got cut into pieces, we can't lechatchila take one and cut in pieces. We will eat them one at a time like this, and we can end up eating the whole thing. We'll leave the last one. That you're not allowed to do. You're not to be mavatal lechatchila. But if it was done, already. So that one piece that was separated from the rest of it, Siman Kuf Yud is going to have a whole discussion, and it's very related to these dinim, these two, what we're learning now in Shulchan Aruch, these two sifim, because we're discussing the din over there called the Parish, Merubah Parish. So it's related over here, but we can't learn everything at once. So we'll just stick to what it's talking about right over here. In this.
Once you cut up the piece, even though it loses the status of Chatich Aruli Skabed, but with what is it going to be batal now? It needs other pieces to be batal among.
Because it was taken from the Taruvos. It was still considered part of Taruvos.
So it's the Klamafreya.
Yeah, it was mixed up before, so there's nothing to answer it lechatchila. Yeah, so let's say they cut up a bunch of pieces. Let's say lechatchila, all of these things were cooked and were meant to be cut up into pieces. So they cooked it before, and then they're cutting up into pieces to make some shish kebab. Who knows they're going to make out? Okay, and then they cut a whole bunch of pieces. So now all of these pieces are going to be mutter. What's gonna happen over here? So the din is that on each piece you cut, you can say the same thing. Okay, but the thing is, let's say once you get to reva chatichas, then what do you want to say now? You're going to say, a person might want to say it like this. Let's say there were 7 pieces of meat there, so you cut up 4. There's 3 left. So you cut up the rave now. So what are you going to say? You're going to say, like, each piece you cut, so each one you're going to say manavshach. Yeah? Okay? It was done b'shegeg. So the person cut up the 4 pieces of meat. Fine. It was done b'shegeg. Each one we say manavshach. If it was mutter. If it was asur, it's batel. Fine. Now he's left with 3 pieces over here. So now the person wants to make a lumdus, wants to make the following lumdus. He says, now we cut up the rave. So now let's not just say manavshach. Let's say that, let's go basar rave. So we can now assume that the 3 pieces left, which are only the minority of the original 7 pieces, the 3 pieces are left must all be kosher pieces. Because let's assume that since we cut up 4, let's go basar rave. We'll go after the majority, and let's assume that the nevela was one of those 4. And now it's cut up, and it's batul. So now we can not only eat these 4, we can eat the 3 too. We can eat the 3 also. Because probably the nevela was one of the 4. So not only can we eat the pieces, we could eat the original ones also. And the Shulchan Aruch says, no doing. No. Even if the majority, the chatucha is mutaras, the hashleimus asuris. Okay, nothing happened. They were asur because okay, nothing happened to these pieces. There's no reason to be a matter of these pieces. The other ones went through a shinui. Okay, but here they went through no shinui. They're still in their original state, and they remain in their original Isser. Taz talks about why is it we shouldn't allow these remaining pieces. We'll soon see it in the Shulchan Aruch. This is Vav. And it's interesting over here. If you remember last week, we mentioned about when you have a beria, and one of the things about a beria is it had to be complete. So if you chop off a leg of the beria, it doesn't have the chumrah of a beria anymore. It's going to be about the b'shishim. Then we discussed what happened if you crushed it, but it didn't really lose any limbs. So I mentioned last week that it's going to be discussed in the next siman. Siman Kuf Aleph Sivav. We mentioned that last week, but the Shach and the Taz brought it in the last siman about beria. So lo and behold, now we're holding by Kuf Aleph Sivav, and here's the din. And that's why he mentions over here, puts beria together with this din. Sivav, how the beria v'chteicher ol iskabed loy botli dafka be'edem shleim. When is it that they're not bottle? Is when they're shalom. That was the 4th condition we had by beria, that they're shalom. Over here, even a piece of meat could be called a shalom, but then a beria, once you cut it, and it's no longer beria. But the chidduch rola iskabed doesn't have to be the whole thing. It just has to be a whole piece that would be big enough to be servable to a chashava erach. Avalim nachtachu, but if we'll cut into pieces, and that's both the chidduch rola iskabed and the beria. On nisrasku ad shenevda tzurosim, but they were smashed until they lost their form. Botlin, the soloch shivi, because they're not considered chashuv anymore. So the barrier, once you can't tell what it is anymore, it got crushed to such an extent, and so too the chticherol is skabed, that it's already lost its chshivas anymore, so then they're going to be bottled. But and here's the psachidish, that even after it got mixed up, it got crushed, not before it fell in, after it got mixed in. And even after you knew about the taruvos, and then you might want to say that since the knowledge that it was mixed in has important significance in halacha, so once it became usher, it became usher. It got crushed later on. Okay, it got crushed later on. Too late. It all became usher. So we say no. Now that it is no longer in existence, this barrier or this chticherol iskabed, so now it's going to be bottled. But don't forget, we didn't find a way around Siman Sadik Tes about the problem of being mevatlas lechatchila. So it's only that you didn't do it on purpose. But if you had in mind you did it b'mezid, so the one that broke it apart, it's going to be prohibited to him. You can't ask for somebody else's food, you can ask your own food. This is just a chazara, what we learned in Siman Tzadik Tes. There's no difference if it was min b'minei and min b'she'ein minei. Okay, whether Ramah needs to say this will be clear after the next simon. So we'll leave it for them. And then the final case over here in Siv Zayin, the final from the cases we just had on the screen. So if one of the pieces got cut, so let me just interject over here. You see later on, it's in Kufyud, you see different places. Hilchas Pesach, you see different places in Halacha, that if you have a Issa Taruvos and you take something out, there are certain cases where we're going to say, let's assume that the one that came out was the one that was prohibited and everything else is now mutar. There are such cases. This is not one of them. And that's what the Machaber is now bavorim. You might want to say, hey, listen, let's just assume that the one we took out was the nevela, and now it's bottle. So all the other shleimas, all the other 6 pieces of meat are mutar. So we can't say such a thing. If you cut up one piece, we don't rely on saying that the iser, the prohibited piece, was the one that was nechtach, was the one that got cut up. And now it's bottle anymore. It's not a chticherol iskabed anymore. It's in pieces. And therefore, v'yikulim b'toros. And you should be able to eat all the other 6 pieces. We don't say that. You can only eat the one that got cut up. The other 6 remain osir. Why are you allowed to eat this one? We say, no matter how you look at it, it's okay. So if it's shel iser, so then everything is a taruvos, everything's mutter. And then for sure it's okay if it wasn't shel iser. And that's the last case we had. And even if the majority, let's say 4 out of 7 got cut up, we can't rely on saying that since we already cut up the majority, let's assume that the Issa was in the majority, and therefore the remaining minority pieces we can eat. Can't say that. The ones that got cut up, you're allowed to eat. The ones that did not get cut up remain in their previous Issa. As the Taz explains, nothing happened to them, and they remain also as they were originally.
Would it be that when he says Af kula mutares, so when it's cut up, it's only mutter when if it's among all the complete pieces, so that's batal bereiv. But if it's not among the other pieces, it just separates, then
then you're saying that it's still in the Taruvos instead of being separate. The problem then would be then if it was Nikra Iser, so it's not really a Taruvos anymore. If they're all whole and this one is pieces, so then it would be Nikr.
And how taka is it mutter if it separates?
You have to think about it. Have to think about it. I was saying before that we go with it according to the original Taruvos. To make it usher, a filo belafle bottle has to be in a Taruvos, and we don't have any Taruvos that's usher anymore. One of the svaras which is discussed over here is once it's parish. Okay, I didn't want to bring it up because it's mainly in Simon Kufyud. But we do sometimes have this idea of called the parish miroba kaparish. Why the Machaber doesn't want to say it over here, it's another story. It talks about that in Simon Kufyud. But when you have a majority and a minority, and then we'll say that the combination is prohibited. If you take one piece out, then we normally assume it came from the majority. And therefore we say called a parish, anything that's separated, miroba kaparish. Why you don't want to say that over there is another story, but perhaps this is enough to make it consider Taruvos. I'm gonna have to revisit this. It's a good question. I don't have it 100% clear, so I'll go over that next time. Yeah, the question was brought up before. I'm not totally satisfied with the answer. Okay, last two sifim don't really fit into the topic here too much directly, but indirectly they do fit in. And this Sif Ches and Tes are based, the way the Mefarshim learn, it's based on a din that we have in the Gemara, Lagabe Dag Tame, that if you have pieces of fish, can you put them together like a puzzle later on and figure out which one came from which? Do we rely on such a thing? Can we look, in other words, if you have a piece that was taken from another piece, let's say I have a bunch of pupiks. Korgaban is Yiddish a pupik. It's the stomach. So you have a korgaban. The korgaban was taken from a chicken. So let's say you have a bunch of chickens there and the korgaban was taken out. So the korgaban doesn't always come out the same way. Sometimes a little more fat comes out. Sometimes less fat comes out. Okay. Let's say you could trace back the korgaban and put it together with the original chicken and see what fits and what doesn't fit. That's sifches. Or let's say siftes. You had a bunch of sheep, okay, and they got all mixed up. One was treif, okay. What happened was you had a bunch of sheep and you shechted all of them, and they're preparing the sheep, so they cut off all the heads, and all the heads are over there on the side. You have 10 sheep and 10 heads, okay. Somebody looks at one of the heads and sees one of them has a problem with the head. The head is full of achveis, water, and it's treifa. So that means, so since the head had a treif in it, so the whole sheep is treif. Okay, and we got 10 heads that are all separated from the 10 sheep. So can we play Lego over here and take the head and see which sheep it fits onto? You got bigger sheep, smaller sheep, look at black sheep, white sheep, the different colors. So maybe we can eliminate by process of elimination. There was a Maisa, a whole Maisa happened once in a Schlachtois like this. Well, it was a real life case over there. One of the Shachtim was able to match it. Okay, but they found out much later and they were able to trace back how it is. But in any case, where do you see such a place like this in Allah? So these two sifim, what the marker for this is in the Gemara where it talks about taking pieces of a fish. You have a piece of fish that part of it has scales and part of it the skin was taken off, it doesn't have scales. Okay, and then they got mixed up with some pieces, and you don't know which are from the one that had the scales and which one not. So the Gemara speaks about putting the pieces together. If you can put together the whole fish, and you can see it came from the same fish, even though this particular slice does not have scales on it, but it was obviously part of another piece of fish which does have scales on it, so we can eat both pieces together. So he's applying that din over here to get out of the din of Achtichar Liskabit. So sifches. Korkaban shenim tzanokuf. Let's say you have a korkaban. You have this pupuk over here, and you find there's a hole in the korkaban. Not the holy korkaban besteht in Shachantaz, the heilige korkaban. This is a holy, has a hole in it. It's a treifa. Later on, and this is what happened in the shlachtais, they separate over there when they're cleaning the chickens. You have a whole pile of pupiks over there. You have a whole pile of korkaban. It's very spongy. So it was like always considered to be a poor person's food. There's the whole discussion over here. When some places they're very poor, so it's also a royal skabit. But normally it's they make a chicken fricassee. There's all of these parts over here, these leftover parts. Shame. So they today in the shlachta it's also like that. They have a whole pile of livers and a whole pile of korkaban. They have a whole bunch of piles. You find there's a korkaban with a hole in it. It's got a needle in it. Whatever the case is, it's obvious that happened. You can tell from looking at it came before the shechita, after the shechita. So now that means we got a treifa chicken not running around. It's already shechted, but there's somewhere in the mixed up with these chickens. One of them is a treifa. So now all the chickens are all mixed up. What do you do? So medamin shuman shebekorkaban l'shuman atarnagele shumakim chibara korkaban. Match up this korkaban with the fat on it back to its original place where it was attached. If they match completely, so this picture of korkaban doesn't have the shuman on it, so that I have to have a little show and tell over here. So here with the korkaban, just pardon my, how many guys kasher a chicken before? Just by the way. Anybody kasher a chicken before? We do malicha, we should probably do it. I remember once the Rebbe said, it was before the summer, and the Rebbe said all Jewish women and girls, okay, we got one thumb up, should learn how to kasher meat. Because you never know, this butcher's not available. This was in the mems, and everybody was, the butchers were kashering, nobody was kashering. Who was kashering meat then? Hardly anybody was kashering their own meat. And so punk that summer, there was a whole problem with the butchers, and people had the only way they could get chickens was they had to kasher it themselves. Anyway, so here's a picture of a korkaban by itself. And you can see all this fat over here on the korkaban. So inside the chicken, so here, I don't know if you can see over here, but this right over here, this little red piece over there is the korkaban. There's the heart right over there. And here's a blown up picture of that. Sorry, the lighting's not so good. But here you can see the korkaban with all the fat. So there's fat, this is the chicken fat, the holy chicken fat for State and Shachantas, yeah? So here you got this fat, and there's fat all around. So this whole cavity over here, the whole body cavity, when you're getting schmaltz, it's all full of chicken fat. So when you pulled out this korkaban from here, okay, you pulled it out, so some of the fat came out and some of the fat stayed. So that's what the Machab is saying, that you can compare the fat that's on the korkaban with the fat that's still left in the chicken and tell which one it came from. So you take the treifa korkaban, and if you can match it up with the chicken it came from, so you matrif that chicken, and all the other ones are okay. That's sifches, not directly related, but indirectly. So to test reish keves nimsa treifa. Let's say you have a head of a sheep and you found it was treifa. Leineda meza kevesu. You don't know which sheep it came from. Hikifa rosh with savarish alechem akavosim, and then hikifa means you put it next to. In other words, you matched it with the neck of all of these sheep. And you find that they fit mamish together and only fits with that one up the other. So in that case, you can rely on this to be matter the other pieces as well. There's a okay, so that's the korkaban, and we got the sheep over here with a bunch of heads. So here it's going to be hard to figure out because you just did copy and paste over here because all of these look the same. These sheep to me, the heads also look the same to me. Okay, and Taz brings down. We're not bucking this. There's going to have to be a very, very big difference for us to rely on this. there's the whole discussion also. There's a svara to say, when a case that mentioned to you before about water in the brain. Let's say there was water in the brain. So you have achreinim want to bring down that since the brain is attached to the spinal cord, the chut hashedra, so therefore there's a shinu in the brain that it was liquefied. So we should see a shinu also in the chut hashedra. You can inspect the spinal cord and do such a thing. And lemaisa, we say that we don't rely on these things. Doesn't say in the Gemara such a thing. So we are not going to rely on it. Okay, got 5 minutes left. Fine. So now, this is Siman Kuf Yud Sev base. You can see the upper left-hand corner. Why are we jumping to Siman Kuf Yud? Because this is related very closely to the din we just learned, and it's contrasted, Adarabah contrasted with this din. So if you remember all the way back at the beginning, okay, so we had the din of Beriach, the Chorol Iskabed, Davar Sheish Matirin. Then we had in Kuf Yud, we're going to talk about Davar Shabbat or Davar Choshuv. That's Sif Aleph over there. And now a din of Balachayim. The din of Balachayim. Balachayim lo betelim. So what exactly is the difference with a Balachayim not becoming bottle and a Chatich Chorol Iskabed? Is it the same thing? Is it not the same thing? And also, if you count the animals, it's a Davar Shabbat Minyan le bottle. So we see over here, this is the Mechaber in Siman Kuf Yud Sev base. He says as follows: Balachayim shenisarvu b'acherim. If you have animals that got mixed up with other animals, some of them are kosher and some not. Okay, let's just go back to the case of the Gemara. I'm sorry to keep switching back and forth. Gemara talking about a case where you have regular behemoths, they're fine kosher behemoths. And you got one that was also fine kosher behema, but it was designated to be a carbon. Once it's designated to be a carbon, it's aser. It's hektish. Somebody shechted, it's chut. All big problem over there. What are you going to do now? So you took a sheep and you said you're going to make it a carbon. You made a carbon. And then it ran away and it's all mixed up and you can't tell the sheep apart. So you have now a big problem now. What's the problem? Say it's bottle. Say it's balachayim and not balachayim and not bottle. That's the din. Balachayim and not bottle. New type. I mean, you heard it in the introduction, but that's another type of afila ba'alef lay bottle. So now you got a big problem. So to shech them all, you're not allowed to do. You say this is chut chutz. Let's say some guy came along and he didn't know. He got mixed up. Somebody gave him a job. He's got to shecht 100 sheep. Okay, and he went to the wrong barn, the wrong ranch, and he shechts 100 sheep, including this one that was a carbon. It's gigantic. It's finished. No, it's shechted. It wasn't allowed to do lachatchila, but it happened. So when they were balachayim lashon chai, when they were still alive, now they're not alive anymore. So now all of these animals are lying down there on the ground after they're shechted. Do we say the bottle? Do we say the not bottle? So the din is balachayim shenisarvu b'acherim. You have balachayim that got mixed together. V'nishchatu, they all got shechted. Bottle chashivusanu b'teila. Busha nishchatu b'shegeg. If it was done b'shegeg, if it wasn't done b'shegeg, it's again the story of Mavatal Israel Chatchila. But it was done b'shegeg. We don't have the chumrah balachayim le b'teilim is only when they're still alive. Once they're shechted, so then they're not balachayim anymore. They don't have this chumrah balachayim, not bottle, and we don't have this dinofil bella flay bottle. Now, before you read the Ramah, don't peek. Think, please. Think back when we were talking about Chatich Chorol Iskabed. These sheep that are lying there now, they were shechted. Okay, they still have their wool on them. What's the din? Are they a Chatich Chorol Iskabed? They're not a Chatich Chorol Iskabed. What's the din? What did the Mechaber say about the thing? They're not a Chatich Chorol Iskabed because they're not cooked. What did Ramah say about such a thing? They're bottle and they're not bottle. They still got the skin on them. What did the Ramah say? A chicken with feathers on it. What's it din?
Not
The
bottle.
bottle or not bottle?
Sorry, bottle.
The bottle. Only if you take the feathers off the chicken. And so he said by the animals is only after you take off the outside. But they're still there with their wool and their skin. They're still there with the hide. So they're not a chticherol skabit. So they're bottle, yeah? So does that fit with this machab or not? L'chor, it fits good. Everything is fine. They're bottle, right? Because they're not balachayim, because they're not alive anymore. They were shechted. And they're not a chticherol skabit. It's too late to be balachayim, and it's too early to be chticherol skabit. Because you didn't take off the wool and the skin, right? Now, along comes the Ramah out of left field, and he says the following: "V'dafka balachayim ktanim." This only applies to small balachayim. She'enim ruam l'schabit lachshchitosim. That are not going to be a chticherol l'skabit. So the Shach comes in over here. Where did this come from? All the Mefarshim asked this question on the Ramah. Why is the Ramah restricting this to the case of balachayim? He needs them to be small balachayim. They shouldn't be a chticherol l'skabit. Yeah, but they're anyway not a chticherol l'skabit. You didn't even take off the wool and the skin yet. What are you worried? Why does the Ramah have to bavarin and limit this din that they're only bottle if they're small, and if they're big, they're not bottle? Why should they not be bottle? This doesn't fit with the previous Ramah. So in Sif Kuf Yud, so the Mefarshim say, wait, you don't remember what you learned in Kuf Aleph. Yeah, we're doing it the same day, so it's pretty hard to forget. We just learned it, yeah. So the Ramah says that it's anyway bottle. It's not a chticherol skabit until you take off the skin. So this din from the Nachaber, the Ramah doesn't really need to say anything. Why does he have to limit to the case of balachayim ketanim? So that is a long shach, and it's going to take a bit of explanation, which we're not going to be able to finish today. So I'm just going to give you the nakuda, and I'm going to go back to this slide over here, and it's behemshech to the previous sif. See, we're learning it in isolation, but the sif base in sif kufiyud comes after sif al. And we have the inyan v'davar shebeminyan. So let's say it's not balachayim because they're shechted, they're not alive anymore. And let's say it's not a chticherol skabit because it still has the hide and the wool on it. Fine. Is it a davar shebeminyan? Davar shebeminyan labotl. So normally when you have animals, you count the animals. When it's chickens, so chickens, do you count the chickens? You buy a case of 10 chickens, you buy a case of this many pounds or this many kilo of chickens. Okay, once the meat is cut up, so then it goes by the weight. But before they're cut up, it goes by the number. You have davar shebeminyan. So davar shebeminyan leibotul is another aspect of this whole picture. So we didn't yet learn davar shebeminyan. We just learned for 2 minutes the din of balachayim. But Meshach, we end up having a machleke Shach and Ramah about whether we have the same gedarim, the same guidelines that we have by chticherol skabit. Do we have the same guidelines by the other types of things which are not bottle? But we'll need to finish that next week, unfortunately. So this is basically out of Chazara. So I'm just going to flip through this. These are the 4 conditions we had in Siman Kuf. It's a Chazara about something with chayas, not a piece of wheat, and something with chilos beriosa, not a nevela, something that will change its name if you cut it up, not like a piece of chaylev, and something which is not chaser. And then we had today the 3 conditions to become a Tichar Liskabi, we had in some Kufal, there has to be a Ismach Msatzme, or Bas Bachol was included in that. The second, we have the big Machlekes Machaber Amov, that has to be Muchen Lagosh, but how Muchen does it have to be? Does it have to be completely Muchen, like the Machaber says, like the Ramah said? You have to at least take off the Shechted and take off the feathers. And the Tnai Shlishi, there has to be something which is Royal Liskabi Lifnei Orchim. Okay, so went a little bit over, but we'll stop here. So we have unfinished business for next week is that Machlekes Shach and Ramah on Simek Kuf Yud base, and we'll look for some clarification on the din of the Monofshach. Okay, we'll stop here. So some of you have been using the flashcards, but almost everybody has not. So unless somebody tells me differently, and really the platform is not working. So it takes time to make these flashcards. So until people are not using it, I'm not going to make them. People are going to use them, and I'll make them. But otherwise, you can just do Chazar on your own. And highly, highly recommended. Okay, Rabbi Sei, sei gesund und stark, Surah Teves.